Oh,
there we are.
And it's waiting for it to kick in. I'm kind of just seeing to make sure it's actually arriving at stuff. I can see, I guess there's kind of a delay feed.
It says it's live on my end.
Okay, and maybe I need to, I'll probably have to refresh that just for the sake of argument. And on live end, we are actually broadcasting. Hello, everybody. Strike, I think, has been turned into a pumpkin somewhere. This is Jackson, who is here for the network, and we may have some others popping up. And I'm looking at the side conversations going on over there. We'll try to deal with that. I'm going to attempt my very first effort at putting up my own little blurb about the opening stick. So at the moment, I'm going to be moving over the exciting world of share screen. That, and then I go share like so, and then I do that. And I'm about ready to do this. And because of the fact we were having some trouble with the audio, we're going to have something else happening, which is that incredibly exciting. Anyway, here we are at the next evolution hour. The topic, which is why keep tabs on creationism and why we don't give a rat's ass about flat Earth. A reaction from Jackson as to what you think I mean by that, and we can kind of start riffing that way.
You ask me what I think you mean by that?
Yeah, bingo.
Well, while I do think pseudoscience in all forms should be combated, at least on some level, there aren't flat earthers who have significant push and pull on our legislation in America. And so I think that would be the primary reason that we would go after creationism rather than flat earthers or 9/11 truthers or what have you.
That is it in a nutshell. You have your pulse exactly on the thing. That I don't know, in fact, flat earthers that have ever had influence on anything of note. You know, there have been certainly ones from the 1850s on, but they're absolutely inconsequential. They're oddballs, and they've had lawsuits with people and are annoying. And some, I guess, a couple sports figures have gone flat earther. I always listen to the science opinions of sports figures. But anyway, different mode when we look at creationism, because we don't have to look very far to find people in political office who are creationists. You're tripping over them in state houses, in legislatures, in governors' things, in the cabinet of our current United States, on school boards. It's all over the place. It varies by state. In Washington State, we don't have much problem of this. I think the last
bunch of Yankees.
We're not even Yankees. Remember, Washington State became a settled area in the 1870s after the Civil War. Spokane wasn't even settled until 1874. There were settlements over on the coast in Portland and along Puget Sound, but you know, way back in the 1850s, there was General Grant served in one of the forts there, I think in Astoria. And the region itself is quite liberal, and there's more than enough liberals on the wet side of the states to overcome everything else. So once in a while, you'll get some little Hanyak state legislator who will put in a pro-intelligent design thing in committee, and it goes absolutely nowhere. There was one that took place maybe like 15 years ago, and that's about as far as it goes. But in Oklahoma and Tennessee and your own Louisiana and such like this pops up, there's usually guys that have been in there and they're in a safe conservative district, and every bloody year they put their little Senate thing in where it's another intelligent design, equal time, freedom of expression thing, and it's again and again and again. And some of them actually will end up getting passed. I think there was one in Oklahoma or somewhere that actually managed
Louisiana Science Act of 2008. Still in effect.
Of modern anti-evolutionism, which doesn't explicitly allow anti-evolutionism, but the point is it allows mechanisms that allow you to do it anyway. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And you can tell me, because you're down there, it's certainly the case, as far as I've seen, that Governor Jindal in his heyday was oblivious to the implications of what the hell he was passing.
Well, I've actually had a good biological education. I have never encountered creationism in biology class. I've encountered it elsewhere in school, but not biology class. I had a very good biology teacher in high school. In middle school, I honestly don't remember if we ever mentioned the dirty E word, but I do know that I knew about it by then and I was studying it by then.
Yeah,
In
so and some would try to avoid the third rail, even though evolution is being taught, use the E word.
just call it adaptation or variation or whatever they want to call it.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and then if you do, then you can go to the library and you can take this book about evolution, make sure it's wrapped in brown paper so that none of your relatives know that you're actually learning the nasty truth. But remember, since 15% of science teachers are creationists, that means 85% aren't. So it looks like, oh, PZ Myers, hello,
There
PZ.
he is.
Are honored, sir.
Hello?
Well, he's joined the conversation, and he's just
Oh,
trying to
there he
find
is.
out. Hello, there you are. You have headphones. I am one of these jerks that can't afford the damn headphones. So if there's any audio
Headphone
difficulty,
Club.
I'm way below on the budget front. Thank you, sir. Well, we're discussing what I consider is a very important subject, and that is the persistence of creationism. I don't think it's a resurgence. I don't think its demographics have actually changed much, although the new millennials seem to kind of show a drop. But its influence has never been stronger. Things at state houses and now in Trumplandia, where we've got the term I like to use is the culture camp, the culture war bunch. And if you look at Tony Perkins and the Family Research Council and Jay Sekulow's bunch, this is all part of a culture war network that has been knee-deep in creationism since their inception. And it's that group that has such a staggering influence in state houses and now in the federal government. Now, even if creationism is not intrinsically discussed, somebody who, like the head of the EPA or the Department of Energy or any of these others, it's the mindset. Somebody who can be a creationist, who can parse their brains so much that they will not notice the things they don't want to think about. You think they're going to be making good science if they start talking about climate policy and all the rest? And even though not all climate skeptics are culture camp anti-evolutionists, virtually all culture camp anti-evolutionists are climate change skeptics. And so you have to look at that, quotes. I've been going after our mutual admiration society guy, Dinesh D'Souza, over the climate change issue because Dinesh is rather vague on anti-evolutionism. He doesn't like it if it tries to explain religion, but he's not really necessarily an intelligent design guy, but he's not necessarily anti-intelligent design. He just doesn't think about it much.
Yeah,
but
I've had friends like that.
Squishy anti-evolutionists. I think in many respects, Mike Pence is a squishy anti-evolutionist. Rick Santorum is a squishy anti-evolutionist. They picked up tropes that they get in Santorum's case from the intelligent design movement, in Pence's case from the more conservative creationist wing, and it filters vaguely in their head. They don't really think about how many zeros there are in the age of the Earth or whether therapsids are mammal ancestors, and that's about as far as it goes. But they do have an ideology first, then conclusions afterward thing. And I have never seen as many culture camp wingnuts as there are in the Trump administration. It blows the Reagan and Bush bunch out of the water. I mean, Reagan, you're way too old to remember the EPA guy, Watt, who thought that there really wasn't a need to preserve the national parks that much because the second coming was imminent and this was all going to have a whole new Earth.
The second coming's always
thought that was kind of weird. And even people in the administration thought that was kind of weird. Reagan, dramatic, oddball, Hollywood conservative, competent governor in many ways. I voted for him both times. Thank you very much. There's the mea culpa on that front. I favored a lot of the policies that he had. I thought he was the best guy for the job at the time. At the same time, I winced a little at some of the things that were happening there, but Reagan never really ended up helping the culture camp on the abortion issue. He never abolished the Department of Education. He had bigger pictures to do. He wanted to combat the Soviet Union, so he got along with the Democratic Congress, and they found ways of compromising and all that sort of stuff to get their bigger agenda. That's not what we're finding in Trumplandia. Are you just listening to me diatribe here, PZ, or would you like to jump in with a comment or two?
Oh, I'm about to condemn you for having voted for Reagan.
I was in favor, and still am, of the Reagan tax cuts. Yeah, go on.
Oh. No, the Reagan tax cuts were a disaster. Everything about Reagan was a disaster. I kind of agree with you that he was, you know, he wasn't a fanatical far right winger. He was a stupid far right winger, and I think that makes him different from the current crop. No, I opposed him every day of his administration. Just could not believe he got elected.
Yeah, so I come from a slightly different perspective. And the same, the reason why I was in favor of the tax cuts, and just as I was in favor of his agreement with the Federal Reserve to try to squeeze inflation out of the system, because that was a far more pernicious thing. We haven't had an inflation problem ever since, but we went through a recession to do it. But we had a weird tax system before that, where you had allegedly high taxation rates on the upper class. I think the figures under the old Eisenhower year was like 85% or so tax rates on the upper class, but nobody paid that. They had tax lawyers to maneuver around that and have tax shelters. So I much rather have a tax rate that's lower, paid more. And that's why the same point was that when Clinton came along and suddenly the Democratic Party moved more to the center, I was also in favor of raising the tax rates up to 42 or even 45% on the upper class. And that's the problem we have now, saddled under the Bush tax cuts that got finalized, and then Trump wants to double down on the same things, that all you have to do is to lower the tax rate, and especially on upper class, and automatically you're going to have this little nirvana. Well, yeah, it doesn't work that way. Anyway, PZ and I can have an arm wrestle over the tax policy some other times. We need to get back to creationism. And what I'm hoping to see is the idea, yeah, made Jackson happy. Hope to see is that we can build up something that doesn't exist yet, which is a real network of grassroots activism that can act as a tripwire and a monitoring system for all of the wingnuttery that's going on that actually impacts people higher up in the food chain, that we can look at it before the barn doors open. The National Center for Science Education kind of monitors it after the doors get open. Some guy comes up with legislation, rather than looking at it and working with local reporters more and local activists more to kind of see these people before they get into the primaries and asking people questions about their background. The question that should be de rigueur right off the bat everywhere, I think the earth is. You can weed out an awful lot of people right off the bat. And if they won't answer such a simple question, well, why is it that you don't know, or you've never thought about it? And if that is, that's a big science issue that you're kind of leaving off the turf. And the fact is, I contend that if somebody thinks the earth is 6,000 years old, that they're scientifically illiterate. Yeah. Intrinsic methods problems, dealing with anything. The fact that they can keep their shoelaces tied and walk the dog successfully doesn't mean they should be doing important lessons.
Well, to do that, though, what you need some kind of local organization that's doing that. I mean, there's what's the name of that group in Texas that does such a good job? There is a
Texas for Better. There's an anti-evolution bunch, and then there's the pro. It's got a long acronym, and it needs to be shorter. But yeah, I've got a ton of their stuff in my bibliography.
Right. Well, yeah, and that's what you need, is somebody who's got boots on the ground and is right there and is prepared to respond. So several years ago, we had something similar in Minnesota, that we had a number of creationists coming up through the legislature and getting appointed by our governor. And what happened is that a bunch of us, community leaders, professors, people associated with the Bell Museum, things like that, all got together and we formed this thing called Minnesota Citizens for Science Education. And what we then did is we had little teach-ins in the Twin Cities. We also sent delegations out to to various meetings. So, they didn't have town halls then, but for instance, Sherry Yecke, I don't know if you've heard of her, was an intelligent design proponent who was head of the school board, the state school board. And they put together a little dog.
What was the name again?
Sherry Yecke.
Oh gosh, can you type that into the group chat, PZ?
Oh, okay. Anyway, I think she's now in Florida. Anyway.
Oh boy, she moved south.
Oh, Yecke.
Closer.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, for instance, I had this little dog and pony show where they were going around the state to all the school districts, and they bring in Sherry Yecke, and she'd say, here's the changes we want to make in the curriculum and in the state science standards. And somebody from our group would show up, and we'd be there to raise protests and complain and explain that did not work. So
yeah,
that's kind of what
now
you
that's
mean.
It's exactly the kind of internet networking that I really like, because I didn't have her in my bibliography anywhere popping up, and so I'm now going to check into that and try to find out a network to find out what she's doing now and how she's showing up on the scope. There were two incidents.
She eventually got drummed out, and she was driven out of the state, basically.
As too whack-a-loon for the ID movement?
Yeah. Well, no, the ID movement loved her, but Minnesota.
Oh yeah, she has a whole 2-paragraph, or there's like a section of her Wikipedia is just intelligent design and teach the controversy.
Yep. And
yeah,
so
I
back and got rid of her.
There were two incidents that kind of
stare her
worries
down
about things. They were both just earlier this year. First was one of the rare instances when the Intelligent Design did one of their presentations, conveniently enough where I could drive through over to Seattle, at Seattle Pacific University, which is a kind of a Christian law school over there.
Hey, you mentioned UPZ.
And it was free to the public, which not all their stuff is. To go over, and I was going over for a book signing for Paralogs of Fog as well, so I was able to crash at my niece's place, and it was on the same weekend period, so I just came over a little earlier so I could see that. And Ann Gager and Jonathan Wells, who I had been worshiping from afar for many years, and what's his name, Douglas Axe, were the main speakers, and it was supposedly on like homeschooling issues, but it actually was just the boilerplate talk, and they had a good showing. It was like 300 people or so. But what was intriguing me about it is that nobody in the secular community over in Seattle apparently was paying any attention to it. I was the only one there monitoring it. I was looking to see what was going on. That's not a good idea, because some of these people are going to end up in teaching in schools or not. They're going to be connecting up with local legislators or not. They're going to be filtering around. We should be paying more attention to that. The other one was piss off annoying. Ken Ham, his bunch, Andrew Snelling and Ord and a couple others were attending a creation show at the University of Montana.
A place they do not need to be.
And yeah, and I found out about this, ironically enough, by SciStrike, who had put a little tweet up about it. And I go, wow, amazing. So I looked up the link on it and found out it was like in the next couple of days. And I was trying to scrape together, because that's in driving distance. If I could have scraped up the money to put the gas in the car, I could be over there in like a few hours. And if I could find a place to stay, it turns out there would have been people in our secular community where I could have crashed. But everybody was so slow on the Facebook response and the communications back and forth that by the time I kind of found out what was going on, it was too late. And anybody in the science community paying attention to this to begin with? Was anybody at the University of Montana doing a pushback or not? They might or might not. I would have wanted to have seen, my ideal would be, you need about 2 or 3 or better 4 people, but not too many, who have their little cameras out, so the young people that can handle the camera instinctively, so they don't have to even think about how to press the buttons. Yeah, and what you have is you put on a very gentle theater, not acting confrontationally. You're not insulting anybody, but especially if they've got the inevitable book hangout where they lay out their wares for sale, You come in and say, oh, look at that, Dwayne Gish in that, or look at that one, the new Michael Denton book. Here's all the things that are wrong with that. And you're having a conversation with your gang, and they are recording and maybe live streaming all of this. And maybe if you can get somebody on the table to be interacting with you, you're polite, you're informative, and you're probing their methodology, you're probing their reactions, and all of this is going into the data stream where you're figuring out what the hell's going on. Well, obviously, I wasn't in a position to do that, and nobody did. Your guys' reactions to what I'm proposing?
Yeah, well, I think you're right. We need the homeschooling in America is just lousy with creationism. I've seen several books by Adam Wiles, I think.
Oh, Jason. Yeah. Well, Wiles. Yeah, I got a couple of his stuff.
It's which one?
Some of the stuff. It's Becca and the Ace Bunch, and then also the Bob Jones University material. There's a whole bunch of stuff that gets recycled. Oddly enough, not much intelligent design stuff.
No, not Lyle. It's Weil. WILE.
J Weil. Is that his
J Weil? J Weil. There we go.
Yeah,
so he writes like these textbooks, and I read the part of the biology one, and it's J Weil, and it's just atrocious. It's terrible. He's like, he just lays out. I mean, the parts that are fine is he's just laying out like, these guys are omnivores, these guys are carnivores, just like very basic level stuff. When this is a high school course, which is kind of funny. It's like, why are we learning about what an omnivore is in a sophomore level biology class? But what he did that was really funny, because he's an anti-evolutionist, is he has this chart, and is like, I've seen this kind of chart before when I was at working in a summer camp, and we have to identify the leaves, and so it's like, is the leaf like have 5 lobes on it? Does it have pointy ends? You know, and you just keep going through the list until you find the type of leaf that it is. So basically, with this chart, it's like, does it have a backbone? Does it have does it have an internal digestive tract? Does it have a backbone? It's just laying out all these different characteristics.
It's very old school morphological if you were in 1850.
Right, but it's so funny because he's an anti-evolutionist, and yet it's like you can follow these same paths to human, or like to the giraffe. Or it's like, does he not realize what he's setting out here?
He doesn't realize, because he's got the Tortugan mind, where there's a point at which things he doesn't think about, he won't think about. So that you can find the ability to have mutually contradictory positions. As a young Earth creationist, he's got them in spades, where simultaneously speciation doesn't happen. At the same time, speciation happens really, really fast as the kinds proliferate after the flood, and they can't see that there's a problem between those, as you and I, Jackson, have talked about in a previous episode on that. So what anybody would be doing at the grassroots level in monitoring these things would be to know what stuff is being presented, what pushback is happening, what is the vibe, how many people are showing up at these affairs. The gang at the Discovery Institute thing had a full hall of easily 300 people. They were largely younger people, not old farts like you would find at the typical atheist convention. And you would have these are people that are potentially born for stuff down the road. And that the problems we're already seeing at the educational system was done by the seed corn that was being planted 10, 15, 20 years ago. Would you agree, PZ?
Yeah, well, it's more complicated than that. But yeah,
complicate away.
Well, I'm just thinking of the specific examples I know of, that it takes more than just exposing them. In Washington State, for instance, you had the Roger DeHart case, where the ACLU actually had to step in and take this guy to court to get him to stop teaching creationism. Here in Minnesota, when we drove Sherry Yecki out, it wasn't a legal case, but it was a political case where we were making the argument that she was not good for the state and that you should not elect this bozo. And we should drive her out. So it's.
Oh, I agree completely on the fact that some things lead into the political realm. that inevitably, when you have a situation where a teacher, another legal case that just popped up fairly recently that Hoppy covered, the freshwater case in Pennsylvania, where this wackaloon young earth creationist who was a Jovinista. I mean, this is at the fringe area. And it took a long and embroiled and acrimonious lawsuit to be able to dislodge this guy. The actual cause celeb was the fact that he was putting little Tesla coil crosses on the kids' arms, and that one of the parents said, "What?" And so that's when all this blew up, because he had been actually putting creationist material in the schools for years, and it had kind of been under the radar where no one really bothered about it. Yeah, you're quite right.
My point is that we often take this approach where we're going to fill in the data. We got the evidence, right? We got the story all laid out. We can show them fossils. We can show them molecules, and that's kind of the lowest strata of what we need to do. That's sort of a foundational approach to here's the science behind it. But what you find when you're engaging with the public, with people in the schools, and with people on the street, is that there's this whole other layer of religious and sociological stuff that you've got to deal with.
Yeah.
And in general, I found,
and in fact,
I've generally found that people like me are not the best ones to deal with that.
Yeah, or even me. I'm a prickly little guy on that as well. But I also have zero illusions. People sometimes ask me when I'm on Twitter joust, and he says, "Are you trying to persuade them that they're wrong?" And I'm going, "Hell no, I can't do that." To change their mind. My purpose is to show the methodology for these fence straddlers. I'm not trying to preach to the converted. The anti-evolutionist, the evolution critic, anti-evolution critic already knows that. It's the person who's looking at it kind of as a sidelier, and they're kind of seeing which side has got the better kind of an argument. The commentator to offer really good argument, to never lose your temper, to always be several steps ahead of them, and that those people might be nudged into start of their own investigation. They mustn't take my word for it. They mustn't take anybody's word for it. I got to get them onto the notion they got to check it out for themselves. And I say the data will out. And
then you run into the fact that many people have a great antipathy to checking it out, because this will lead them into something that will conflict with their family or their church or their friends.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, but even without that, I mean, I already. Oh, yeah, jump in, Jackson.
Oh, I was just gonna say, in the street evangelicals that I've come across, you're right. They bring their whole families to these events to preach at college at these college students, most of whom just walk by without
a comfort zone to work from.
Yeah, they bring kids, 5-6-year-old kids, to these things who are all dressed up and everything. They bring their wives. They bring the whole gang, and so it's all about. And actually, that was something that Savannah and I were talking about. Savannah's my girlfriend, by the way. We were talking about maybe next time, instead of talking to the ringleader who we usually do, maybe we should try talking to one of the people our age who's in his gang. Maybe that'll get
that's an interesting thing to explore.
Yeah, maybe we'll get somewhere with that.
Yeah, when I go to Skepticon every year, which is a big conference in Springfield.
I wish I could go.
It's really a good
yeah, event. So do I.
Yeah, and for the past couple of years, there have been protesters out on the street, which is really interesting, because they bring their kids, like you just mentioned. They are all dressed up like they're going to church.
They go to meeting.
Their best behavior. They're actually kind of cute and adorable and all this sort of stuff.
They're on their best behavior. It's something that is it's a part of their ministry. That for them, the most important thing in the world is converting people to Jesus. And this evolution skeptical stuff seems to be getting in the way. So it's part of Satan's plan. I mean, that they need to overcome that, and they've got the best
something like that. They're actually very low key, and they've got some signs. They're kind of. But they're actually just there to stand up for Jesus, right? So they're there. They're being very nice. The weird thing about it is Skepticon is a totally free conference. So if you're there, you can just walk in. It's not like you got to pay a bunch of money to
They
get in.
must stay outside.
Yeah, but they stay outside.
Well, too many people looking skeptical in the building.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and they know if their little kid goes and hears me speak, that they'll just have to go to
Well,
hell
you
afterwards.
get a complex dynamic. When we would have our skeptics table from our Free Thought Society at the Spokane County Fair, which we did for several years to show people that we're there, you'd get a variety. You'd get the loudmouth preacher-to-be who comes in and starts rehearsing his act in front of us, and that's kind of thing. Then you get the hit-and-run student, often a teenager, who will pick up one of the little pro-evolution pamphlets at one of the other tables and come by and at 90 miles an hour, drop it off on the desk and run off, and never actually engage on stuff. You get a whole bunch of different approach mechanisms on that, which is kind of fun to watch. I love when one actually did stop long enough to say, here, he was thrusting it into my hand, and I'm going, oh, this is sweet. The little smiley face thing on the little crib version of the scripture. Excuse me, I've read the original. If the long version didn't impress me, you think this little teeny pamphlet's going to cut it? And he really wasn't quite up to engaging. Then you get the ones that are the most fascinating. There was a young kid who had just won an award from, I think for his pig or something at the fair. And he came by and he saw the booth with his parents, and he waited for the parents to go off somewhere else. And he came back and just kind of stared and looked at us. And he said, well, you want to talk or whatever? No. And then he went off, and then he came back a little later, and I happened to be there with a fellow who was an ex-minister, and he is very much a farm kid, and he started to talk to the guy about the award that he'd won in the belt and all of that, and he finally sat down. We didn't talk religion, we didn't talk evolution, nothing whatsoever about it. The discussion that was primarily between the older guy and the younger one was about farming and all the rest, and in the course of the conversation it came out that he was from, I think, Clarkston, which is a very small rural farming community. And what I got the idea was, he didn't pick up any of our brochures or anything, but I figured what it was is this guy had lived in a very insular world where he thought maybe that there was a world outside that he might have some thoughts about, but he didn't know they existed. And he's not ready to maybe to make a plunge. He may never become a free thinker or whatever, but I was hoping that the kind of non-confrontational exchange that we had back and forth may have planted a seed there where he might the thing a bit.
Yeah. I also typically do things at the fair here, but we don't have a free thought community in my town. We're too small.
Oh, wow.
So I'm often there I man the university booth, or I man the Democratic Farmer Labor Party booth. And I'm not there to talk about religion or atheism or anything, but what's hilarious is Minnesota has this long tradition of socialist farmer sort of things. So I'm sitting there and these old people come up, 70, 80, 90 years old even, in overalls, and they are the most radical people ever. They're communists. They want communism to come in here. They think, this church
Washington is the same schizoid. In rural Washington, which is a bulk of the state in terms of sheer area, you're going to find Trump posters all over the place. But Washington is also the hotbed of wobblies and the international workers of the world. And we still have a little teeny cadre of leftists who put on their little booth and their little wobbly posters, and I go, my God, this is like 1919. It's just hilarious.
And it's kind of a tier system where the older people are more radical, and then there's this middle tier of Republican farmers who are usually corporate farmers, and they're very conservative and they're very Trumpish. And then there's the young people who tend to be much more liberal. So it's like this.
Well, there's
bunch of
always
liberal college students.
What's that?
Can rebel against their parents. So you would have very leftist parents in the 60s, and then their kids become neocons in the 1980s, and then their grandkids become something else. So there's always that aspect of it, that whatever it is the previous generation did, you want to be different from it. And it takes a long time for the dust to settle out.
The what I've read, interestingly, I do want to say first, PZ, I have seen several of your Skepticon talks. I always enjoy them.
Oh, good.
But I also say again, RJ, what you said. Say it again. I lost train of thought.
Oh,
You were
good
talking about
gravy. You
the
have
farmers,
you're too
right?
young
The
to have
kids,
brain farts.
right? So well, for me, at least in my experience, although I know quite a few conservative people my age, I think most of us are pretty liberal. But what I've read is that the next generation is supposed to be like uber conservative, like the most conservative generation in the past 100 years. Is what I've read.
Well, from what I've seen demographically from the millennials, they tend to be more free-thinking and liberal and less doctrinal than the old school from my generation, the millennials, unless they're very religious. So then you'll see on, for example, the gay rights issue, there's an abrupt bifurcation if they come from a heavily religious background, in the same way that you can see an awful lot of black evangelicals who are for Trump, and they would be for bathroom bans and all of that stuff that doesn't figure in the conventional thing where they would have voted for Obama in 2008 and 2012 and then vote for Trump in 2016. So you've got complex factors, and religion is one of the primary definers. As I've looked at in the creation evolution issue, I came up with what seems to me a fairly good description: culture camp, conservative, religious. If you have that cluster, you are very likely to be an anti-evolutionist, and there will be a mass of baggage you'll have with you. The outliers are so few in number, it's very difficult to find, and PZ, you could probably give a cross-check on this, other than Michael Denton, who's an agnostic, and Richard Milton, who's a wacky young earth creationist non-religionist, and David Berlinski. That's kind of it for non-religious anti-evolutionists that I know of.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That concept always bothers me, to think that they're playing for the team with God, but they're not religious. That's always kind of what's going on there.
I don't know about Berlinski though.
I
You
think
cannot interpret what Berlinski is thinking. He's so opaque. But
Berlinski
anyway,
is
I
the
was going to say that there are counterexamples to what you're talking about. That I find this idea of generations changing kind of bizarre, because my family, my grandparents, my parents were radical labor sorts of people, and
conservatives
so
for me.
yeah, they were. It's liberal, progressive throughout, and my kids have turned out to be pretty progressive and liberal. So apparently, my family knows how to raise kids right. That's all I can say.
Yeah, I don't believe in some sort of simplistic determinism. The one area that was intriguing was the fact that in William Jennings Bryan's day, there was not the immediate connection of anti-evolutionism with conservative politics, because Bryan was a left-wing progressivist. He would get burned at the stake in the modern GOP on almost all of his economic policies, and he was largely a pacifist and all the rest. But once you get past that new brand of creationism that comes out of the a kind of suburbanite Dwayne Gish branch of things in the 1960s on, it basically congeals into a monolithic block. I've got about 2,000 anti-evolutionists in my reference base that's got like 8,000 sources. And of those, other than those three that I mentioned, it's hard to find anybody who is not falling into that culture camp, conservative, religious bankrupt. Also, you find the propensity for secondary citation, that 95% of them never bother with a primary source. They simply copy somebody else's arguments, sometimes slavishly so. And Richard Milton is a minor player on the field, but he's just absolute my poster child for scholarly.
We should tell PZ Myers, Dr. Myers, about the one the other day that we saw, that with Proto-Avis.
Oh, the Proto-Avis case. Yes. Tell him about the Proto-Avis case. Yes, and how RJ's scholarship came to your aid.
It is true. It's true, Dr. Myers. I guess I was sent a link. That's the story I've gone with. I think it was a link someone sent me to a video about by a creationist organization called Genesis Apologetics. You ever heard of them?
No, that's a
yeah,
new
which
one.
I hadn't heard of.
No, I don't think I'd heard of it either. But so I watched this video. It's on the global flood. It's like fossils, Noah's flood, or evolution, essentially. And so it's a whole bunch of quote mines and lies, misrepresentations, etc. And so at one point they bring up a paper. This I think it's titled "A Fossil Bird Shakes Up Evolution."
Beardsley.
Yeah, by Beardsley
Nature,
and
1986.
yeah, Beardsley 1986. So they did the paper, and I'm writing this long rebuttal to the video in the comments under it because they only have a Facebook page. They don't have any comments on their YouTube video. So I went to their Facebook, and so I asked RJ. I said, "Hey, I need help with this paper," and he looked it up and he said, "Oh, it's Proto-Avis. This is not even a real animal." And I was like, "Thank you."
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay.
Travis from the 1980s, a
Yeah.
Chatterjee little theme where he was finding what probably were bits and pieces of Herrerasaurs from the Dockham Formation. And so basically, I was suddenly like Santa Claus dumping all this information on Jackson out of the blue because I'd already researched this. I knew exactly what it referred to. And so I could just give him the benefit of that information.
Uh-huh.
I was just like, "Oh my gosh, thank you," because it was
I don't keep
ridiculous.
my references separate. I created a gigantic data set. So I'm able to kind of see connections that maybe other people wouldn't because I don't have to go hunting around in umpteen different posts. I've got one gigantic block of information in my main data set. All of my main Troubles in Paradise stuff is one monster file, so I don't have to go plug it around. I had to do them in small files in the old days because you and PZ and I are old enough to remember when you had a 1.4 megabyte size on a file because that's all you could save on a floppy disk.
But what was great about the Proto-Avis thing was it got even better than that. It turns out they didn't actually read the article. They copied Duane Gish's article on the article.
Somebody who copied Duane Gish because it's a very narrow field. Hank Hanegraaff did it. Scott Hughes did it. You have a small number of young Earth creationists who parasitically copied Duane Gish's version of the Proto-Avis case. And it was fun because he had actually a long paper trail of everybody forgets there were a couple different Duane Gish books that he did. Even today, you'll find too many people riffing off of Gish's stuff from the 1980s. No, please pay attention to his 1993 book, Creation Scientists Answer Their Critics, and the 1995 Evolution, the Fossils Still Say No. That's where I really pull them apart because there are some spectacular crash and burns. I went into them in the Evolution Slam Dunk, where Gish reveals by the circuitous nature of what he cites and when that he knew information that blows his argument to smithereens, but yet he deliberately doesn't mention it, even though we know he knows about it because he cited the papers. No, boy, those are gold mines. Gold mines.
Well, and Gish just ripped everything off from Whitcomb and Morris, who ripped everything off from George McCready Price. So it's plagiarism all the way down.
It's a fascinating. He is the Mount Olympus of young Earth creationists because of all of the detail fiddlers, he was one of the most ingenious and diligent. I have a perverse respect for his ingenuity in how he could tiptoe through, like Arthur Strahler's 500-page criticism of creationism, and find just exactly the little bits that helped his case if you pulled them out of context and quoted them very carefully. And so it's a guy I have no respect for in terms of his scholarly integrity, but for his manipulative skill, there are very few people. Jonathan Wells started getting close to that, but the guy that eclipsed him completely was Casey Luskin, the Duane Gish of intelligent design, because by sheer volume, do you realize that 14% of the entire intelligent design literature is just Casey Luskin?
Yeah.
When I did the count ups on it in my spreadsheet, and functionally he was their paleontology department. Now that they've got this new guy Beckley that they've hijacked from Germany, although whether or not he's actually going to say much on paleontology, I'm still wondering about it. Creationist, in fact, just a couple days ago waved Beckley at me because I said, name a notable paleontologist who's an anti-evolutionist, and he found a little thing on Wikipedia from Beckley, and that was as best as he could do. Paleontologist as far as it goes, but it's kind of hard to figure out what he actually thinks, and he hasn't actually done any op-eds yet at the Discovery Institute, and I'm not entirely sure he's going to be able to do that.
There's also that guy, what's his name? The guy who did the PhD work on Mosasaurus.
Oh, Kurt Wise, and then Marcus Ross.
Yeah, Mark Ross. Yeah,
Who is?
He's a paleo. He got his he got his training in paleontology at the University of Rhode Island. But it's pretty obvious now after the fact that he was just after his degree as sort of a little veneer to put over
Aren't they
himself.
always?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's been very sparse. He pops up on the videos. And I mean, dinosaurs are a particular area of mine, and the same thing with Kurt Wise. Excuse me, but if I seem to know more about the technical literature than they do, what exactly does that PhD mean?
Well, it's like what is Georgia Purdom? It's like she's a geneticist. Genetics is, as was it Francis Collins said, it's like if there were no other evidence for evolution, the evidence from genetics alone would prove evolution, and yet she just just doesn't know, then is against it somehow because she just isn't interested in learning the material that she should know.
And it's a sad reality that you can get a PhD with an extremely narrow focus, where you just focus on getting one teeny tiny slice of the data, and you don't get any breadth. You don't look outside that.
That reminds me, there was a psychologist, a woman who spoke at Skepticon one year, who does a lot of work on the psychology of religion, and she was going to do a paper on the psychology of atheists, but the person who was the doctor in charge of her, I guess, said, "Don't do that because you're about to be up for, a nomination or whatever it was."
Yeah.
Well, I can't remember her name, but I remember watching that.
Yeah.
Yeah, if the name pops up, give us a little heads up on it, because I'll check to see on that. I love to keep track of all the different players in the field, and the more I keep track of them, the better I can give you information on Beardsley.
I was there. I remember her too, but now her name escapes me, and I even bought her book.
Psychology of Atheists. Okay, let me see. Oh, here we go. Why psychology is silent when it comes to atheism. Dr. Melanie Brewster.
Oh, yes. Yeah, she was a really good speaker too.
Yeah, that's right. I watched that video when I was cataloging specimens at the museum. I remember now.
Yeah,
good times.
Skepticon has been really good about bringing in a diverse bunch. They don't just bring in the same old faces every year. So you get.
I don't have her in my listing. I'll have to check.
I mean, we do like some of those old faces. Some of them are pretty.
Yeah, but I mean, it's good to see some variety as well.
You're right. Hey, maybe they could hit me up. I'm here.
I'll mention your name.
Oh, thanks. Thank you.
I don't know, Bart. I'd like to give a lecture.
Yeah, I think I could tell them about my experience with creationists my age. Or perhaps biology or whatever it is. I mean, of course, there are also lots of people way more qualified than me to speak about biology. So,
well, don't sell yourself short there, boy. You've got a very retentive mind. You're better than I am on remembering the damn species names. I'm slow on the uptake on a lot of that. And I've gotten a lot of really wonderful news sources because of our chats in our after shows.
Yeah, and there's also something to be said for bringing in a different perspective, because that's what people want to hear, especially when you're at a conference that's organized by college students. They've got to be appreciative. They must be putting together their speaker lists now, because they're going to have to do it soon. So it may be too late this year, but I will mention your name to a few people and see what happens.
Well, thank you very much. I'll be here. Well, or in Baton Rouge, one of the two.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember, PZ, you were at the Darwin on the Palouse a few years back.
Yep.
Pandemic.
Yep, that was fun. Yeah, there's weird things going on out there. Yeah.
So the uptake, since we're getting near to the end of the hour on there, the main point is for people to interact more. I find the Twitter platform really useful for my purposes. Not everybody is tweet haiku friendly, but I find it handy because I've been able to find, in effect, like a spider network that because it runs linearly rather than as a series of little boxes the way you get on Facebook or some of the other hangout modes, it's a continual torrent stream that I can kind of parse over very, very quickly. And I follow a bunch of different zones. One are the scientists that are the people that are in my bibliography and activists in the field. So PZ is on the list, and Richard Dawkins and all that, although he doesn't tweet a heck of a lot. But a lot of the actual scientists that are active in the field, yikes, the name suddenly escaped me. Richard Lenski, who, by the way, contributed to my tip project. Thank you, Richard Lenski. Anyway,
He's a cool guy.
Up the latest skivvy that they hear on the latest technical literature. And so I've got a spider line tripwire out to an awful lot of material that I wouldn't necessarily notice in my weekly passes. I check PNAS Science and Nature every week to see what their new material is. And then the other ones that come up in the course of sidelines. Now, the other side is the following the opposite end. I don't give diddly squat about weird young earth creationists that I just encounter through Take That Darwin or somebody like that. I'll exchange stuff back and forth and I keep a track of what they have to say, but I don't follow them because they're just repeating stuff they've regurgitated somewhere else. But all of the upper echelon ones, the fact claimant bunch that are on Twitter, I do make a point of following. So Douglas Axe and Ann Gager are both on Twitter. Denise O'Leary is on Twitter. The little troll David Klinghoffer is on Twitter. You get Ross. Faisal Rana doesn't do much on Twitter, but he's there. Ross is a polite little cuss. He actually replies to me. And I've been acting as a selection pressure, PZ, because he used to do an awful lot of what I call gee whiz. He would go through Science and Nature and various technical journals where he would say, oh, this incredible, complicated thing that speaks of design. Back research on whatever the subject was and find some of the technical literature on the evolution of that system and then put the link to those and say, oh, that's an interesting subject. And here's the evolutionary origin paper. And I've noticed that he's been doing less and less of the gee whiz postings. And I'm hoping in my egotistical way to think that it's mainly because, oh dear, I better not do that because that damned RJ guy is going to be down on me with some technical paper. And I learned stuff too as a result. Sometimes what always intrigues me as a gee whiz, it's not usually something I would have put in tip anyway. Because it's a side issue. It's like somebody that's studying a particular interaction of some protein or cis regulatory element that they finally worked out the crystal structure for example. And it's interesting stuff, but it's not really at the level of figuring out the mutations and the selection pressures and the phylogeny implications of all of that. And so it's interesting that it'll be the case that there will be technical literature that I've already done a pass through that from those very issues. And I'll say, oh, nice of you to have noticed this, but in the very same issue was this paper and this paper. And that's another thing, that he's very parsy as to what he wants to look at for his gee whiz. To say something, Pete?
I tend not to follow those people because it turns out when I do, I get kind of pissed off.
Hulk smash!
and eventually I get blocked. So, it's like,
well, I've never been blocked. For a while, I thought Ross must have blocked me because I'm wondering where in hell are his posts. He's just stopped tweeting. And it turned out I checked and found out, no, he wasn't deactivating me. He wasn't blocking me at all. No, your lower echelon creationists will do that. But remember, Jackson can maybe attest. I'm a sweet, pleasant, polite person. I never lose my temper.
So what are you saying?
PZ, bye. But the thing is,
yeah, like I got blocked by Ken Ham because I raised a few criticisms.
Well, you crapped all over his arc. I mean, that happened.
Ken Ham blocked me because I snark at him all the time. Hi, Cy, you finally showed up.
I mean, PZ, you. Oh, hey, Cy.
Here.
Howdy.
Yeah, we've been having fun with PZ Myers. I am honored, sir, that you have joined our merry brigade as long as it is, and hope you're enjoying the conversation. Well, the pug has showed up almost to be the end of things.
Yes.
Situation where we have much more of an active thing. The reason why I was defending Twitter as a format is because of its convenience and utility for being able to follow threads and to be able to communicate stuff. You can have both the private chat thing and then the upfront stuff that you want to be seen by the public. But I'm approaching everything from a methods point of view. Yes, I want to exchange the debate on their level, but I want to find out where they're getting their sources from. Check them. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. They don't fact check. And ironically, I've never found a creationist yet who will ever lie on this point. Make up a source. They will never claim to have fact checked something they haven't. They'll just shut up. The surefire deal breaker deactivation mode, you just ask, oh, says who, and how did you fact check it? And I figure if more people make use of that methodology, and also another thing that I think is the case with some critics of creationism, if they don't know the material well enough, they don't read that much creationist material. And if you don't know where they're coming from, you don't know where the trapdoors are. You don't know where the material is. Whereas Jackson now, if anybody tries to bring up Beardsley again, he's primed to know what it all is in terms of the context.
I am ready this time. I do want to ask, we got a question from the live chat. Someone's asking, do you know Trey the Explainer?
Do I know who?
I've heard of him. I haven't been following on that. And PZ, maybe
yeah, Trey the Explainer is a guy. He's a YouTuber, and he makes videos on paleontology, biology, cryptozoology, talking about all this different stuff. And so I actually sent RJ and I watched one of his videos on ontogeny and neoteny.
Yeah, and I think I may have seen one that he did on whales. That may have been a Trey the Explainer.
Yeah, Peter and I tried getting in touch with him a few weeks ago on Twitter. He never messaged us back, and I just hadn't. I just keep forgetting to message him again. I mean, he probably gets a whole bunch of messages per day. So
which
I
side
keep on
of the
telling
argument is he
everybody.
on?
Do what?
Which side of the argument is he on?
Oh, he's on our side.
Oh, good. Okay.
He's pro-evolution. Yeah, recall from the thing, they're very good graphics. They're very compact. I'm not much of a video watcher because video is a cool medium, and it's got its limitations and its strengths. And one of its limitations is, from a source methods point of view, it's very source sparse because you just don't put up references to crap. And so from my point of view, it's not useful in terms of doing the primary source research area, but I always like ones. I love the thing that Pelagia did with me because on the Incredible Bunny Eyes, because I love the title, and also he did a spectacular job of the graphics and all of that. It's the more people have seen that video than anything I've ever done. He's like 5,000 now.
It's a good video. It's a really good video.
He's very talented. And that is one of my limitations. I'm basically a talking head who writes books with notes. So I'm not nearly as clever on the being able to do the video graphics. And he's a caricaturist. His caricature of me is not flattering but dead on. And so I can't complain about that. It's very accurate enough. I'd like to see a far more of an interconnectivity in whatever platforms we're on and whatever social media we have, so that we don't allow these things where the creationists and the woo people that are now in public office to be able to do as much as they can do without us taking notes of it. So I'd love to see much better of following of the various conventions that anti-evolutionists do. If they're open to the public area, you can go in and make sure that you can document and connect up, because sometimes you may be surprised to find out who's connecting up with who. I wouldn't have found out that somebody like Pat Sajak, the stupid talk show, the host on the Wheel of Fortune, he's a Coulter Camp conservative. He connects up with the same bunch that's like the Rushdoony band of wackaloon conservatism. And so there's baggage in that cute cherubic face that you wouldn't necessarily know as the wheels spin on the letters every week.
That was quite phrasing. That was interesting phrasing. I do want to point out, though, right before Sai came in, we were talking about the Ark. I mean, you're saying like you got blocked by Ken Ham. I mean, you wrecked his Ark, PZ. You wrecked his Ark. He had to talk about it on his show. That's how bad it was.
Yeah, I've actually run across several other videos that take it even more to task. So what I did was,
like what?
I was at a scientific conference. I was not there for the Ark. I just kind of breezed through. But yeah, just I think it's just because I have enough people listening to me that made my brief smiting of the ark a little bit more potent.
Well, hey, you smited it first, or you smite it first, or smote maybe.
Yeah.
But William Town will do it
how,
next.
How does one conjugate smiting? I think we need to have a grammarian on that. I was going after the ark on the number of kinds, because as far as I know, they don't actually make like a list, because like they don't actually have one. You actually theoretically could fit probably-ish 8,000 kinds aboard the ark. There's probably physically enough space, especially if you have babies and somnolent sauropods. But I'd still like to have a damn list. And then the issue.
If you look at the ark, if you go through it, what you discover is that in order to fit their 7,000 models of animals on there, they've got them in the most awful tiny little cages, all stacked and lined up there.
Peter would have a fit.
Yeah, there's
9 little theropods sitting there. It's just all you got to do is to feed it some melons and some leaves, and its razor sharp teeth will just have happiness with it.
Yeah, if you think about it, when you go through it, it's a counter argument against the whole idea of the ark, because just imagine the zoos you've been, all the acreage you've got for those animals, and there's nothing like that on the ark. They're all
I worked out a deck plan as a spreadsheet to kind of see what the physical numbers were, and I was actually quite surprised that with about a cubic meter per kind, and with about half of the deck space allotted to the food and shit, the things, whatever they deal with, there's enough space for 8,000 compartments, and with room left over. And so I was actually quite amazed that was theoretically possible. Of course, you might have to crawl through guineaways and stuff to be able to get to them, and some of the animals would be quite small, and supposedly there would be just a baby
sauropod. More to taking
sauropod.
care of animals than just having a small compartment. You simply cannot do that. They will not survive. No. But this is the same analysis that Woodmarapa did years ago. You must remember him.
Oh yeah, the feasibility study. He was really vague about numbers. There's no listing in the appendix where he lists off all the kinds. And Woodmarapa, I despise him with a vengeance. For those of you who don't know the skivvy behind him, his real name is Jan Pexius, and he actually published a real live paleontology stuff in actual paleontology journals in the 1990s. But then he puts on his creationist hat under the nom de plume of John Woodmarap and will cite his own work as an example of evolutionary propaganda. He's a weird little guy, and lit into Glenn Morton one time, the ex-creationist, as he was an apostate for daring to dispute John Calvin. And he's an oddball.
Yeah.
What was it? There was a guy who did for Talk Origins Robert Shadowald.
Shadowald, yes, he
Shadowald
did a stunning amount of stuff over the years. Absolutely fabulous.
Did I send? I don't remember who it was, but there was it was in my my rebuttal to the Genesis Apologetics video. He talks about the hydraulic sorting, and he says like the concept of magnolias running for the hills only to be overwhelmed by small mammals is slightly unconvincing.
I love that quote. I think that's one of the classic quotes of all anti-creationism, where the idea of magnolias sprinting up to the higher elevations is a piece of imagery that you just can never get out of your head, because you picked up on exactly the same quote I did. I used it in Tip. It's just like classic.
Alice in Wonderland stuff.
Like that are the ones that anybody who doesn't quote them is a blockhead, because nobody can say it better. Well, I think we're past our time. I'd be delighted to continue on as an after show that we can have anybody pop in. Because we're on that. I would like to thank the belated Pug for arriving at the last minute. And I would like to thank PZ Myers for coming in and jibber-jabbering with me, and Jackson, the voice of the future in his dark cave with the cat. As a fun person here. Thank you very much. We've had some wonderful side comments on here. Is Woodmarap dead yet or not? Anonymous Y Mus says, nope, he's not, and I don't wish him any ill, but his work is claptrap. I tore him apart in Slam Dunk on the reptile-mammal transition, which is my favorite one. But anyway, I'll be stopping the broadcast here, and Anybody who wants to show up, I will be generating very soon a after show venue that we can deal with and continue the conversation. Thank you very much. Au revoir, auf Wiedersehen, aloha.